When I boarded Virgin Voyages for my trip, I was apprehensive. I arrived with a whole set of preconceptions and definitely concerns based on all I'd heard, seen and read. But once I was on board and cruising, those were soon forgotten, and they were actually replaced by a series of totally unexpected things that no one had been speaking about. So I want to share those with you, as I think you really do need to know about them, especially if you're wondering if cruising with Virgin Voyages is something you should consider, as I really don't think they've been spoken about enough. By the way, I was invited by Virgin Voyages to go on this cruise to see what they're all about. And so importantly, I'm also going to answer if I will be back as a paying passenger based on all of this that I'm about to share with you. Now, before I get into the two biggest things that threw me, let's get the ship out of the way. But first of all, I'm Gary Bembridge, and I'm here to make it fun and easy to discover, plan and enjoy unforgettable cruise vacations. Their ships divide opinion as they look so different. The shape, the grey colour, the swimming pool and the beds we've all heard about, and the in-your-face design. However, having cruised, I've found a much more dramatic issue that I think you need to know about that has been, in my view, totally overlooked. Now, these are pretty big ships. They hold 2,770 passengers, or sailors as they like to call us. But instead of the usual big showpiece atriums, grand theatres and mega lounges, Virgin Voyages are filled with lots of small venues and with lots of nooks and crannies both inside and around all the decks. So as you walk around the ship or out on the decks, you move from small venue to small venue. Unlike other ships of similar size I've been on recently, this was a dramatic change. The venues in size were more like being on some of the smaller ship lines that I love, a kind of small ship venues on a big ship experience. There is no grand and dramatic multi-deck atrium packed with bars, restaurants, casinos, shops and lounges, all kind of opening onto it and acting as the central focal point of the ship. The closest is probably the two-deck roundabout with a little bit of seating, the chart room help desk, the vinyl record store, and on the lower level, the On the Rocks bar, but there's no big dramatic center point. Instead, you'll find a multitude of bars, restaurants, coffee shops, lounges, guest services, retail shops, tattoo parlor, ice cream venue, and so on. And these are all dotted across deck 6 and 7. And they are all smaller than on ships of a similar size. They're high on themes too, so you constantly drift into different experiences and different vibes. This is also true once you're out on the decks. There's a wide full promenade on deck 7, and again it's full of small little spaces to sit, including the dock at the rear, which absolutely was one of my favorite places to sit. Up on deck 15 and 16, the same is true. Compared to similar sized ships, there is no vast pool deck, but instead there's a series of smaller venues to laze about in, and they're dotted around rather than having most of the passengers kind of focused around the big swimming pool. So the Aquatic Club, which has two pools, one which has been much discussed, is the definitely more plunge pose and cooler pool than the usual cruise pool to swim in. And then there's a round pool for lolling about in, which I saw was really popular for getting in and socializing, or standing around and socializing. So instead of that vast pool deck as the focal point for sunbathing, there are many other themed places to sit, such as the Athletic Club at the rear, and it has the famous net there where you can lie and look down 15 decks. They also have various smaller spaces on the decks. Some have covered seats and they're dotted all around. Now, those people traveling in suites, they also on top of that have Richard's rooftop for sunning themselves. It feels very different, and I've not appreciated this, as I think I got caught up in all the buzz about the look and the design aspects. Now, I did wonder if this multitude of different venues is created for a world where our attention spans are definitely getting shorter. This variety makes the ship, I guess, very Instagrammable because there's so many different venues, but definitely as you walk about, you're constantly entering new zones and new areas. Probably the biggest venue you ever go to is the Red Room, which is the theatre. And then that's not particularly massive, and the layout constantly changes based on the show. The Manor, which is the nightclub, it's also surprisingly cozy considering the numbers on the ship. Again, because there are lots of alternative places to go, so the venues are small. Now, I found this actually very refreshing and totally unexpected. It did remind me when I was on board that many lines use exactly the same ships and just alter the decor by brand. The two cruises I'd been on before Virgin Voyages were on two sister lines in the same corporation, and they were exactly the same ship, exactly the same layout, but with different decor to try and reflect the brand. So I liked that on Virgin they have smaller venues, more intimacy on a big ship. It's definitely, though, not for everybody. Some people I spoke to were less keen on the ship. They missed the classic cruise ship layout, and what they said is they really missed the big central atrium because they felt there was no focal central buzz and energy to the ship. Then some, of course, missed the larger pool if they want to do more of a swim. So certainly, if those things are important to you, something you should consider if you're thinking about Virgin Voyages. The next thing that surprised me about Virgin Voyages was the biggest one of all and threw me somewhat. Now, of course, I knew that Virgin Voyages had scrapped the main dining room and instead had 9 key dining venues where you basically book a time to eat on the app, and you can only visit each of those, I knew, once for dinner, so you couldn't go to the same venue multiple times. I also knew certainly that they argued they'd scrapped the buffet restaurant, although I'll talk a little bit about that because I don't think that's strictly true. I also knew that all the food was included, so there were no charges for any of the restaurants, unlike other ships with specialty dining charges. There was one surprise aberration to that rule, though: afternoon tea, which cost me $19. Now, as an addict of afternoon tea, that not being included was a little bit disappointing and kind of out of character in some ways. But the bigger surprise than having to pay for afternoon tea is just how good the food is. I really hadn't expected that at all. I thought the food was really good, and I think that much more should be made of this. I suspect that's what word of mouth by people who've cruised on Virgin will be saying. There are 5 dining venues out of those key 9 that were my absolute big favorites. The first was the Wake, which is the seafood and steak restaurant at the rear of the ship. I felt that was probably the most upmarket feeling, beautiful venue. I also really liked the Mexican restaurant. Now, this is called Pink Agave. It's also where I first came across one issue that some passengers do have about Virgin Voyages dining that I will come on to shortly. Thirdly, I really like the Italian, which is called Extra Virgin. It's exceptional. It was a real favorite with everyone I spoke to. I don't think I spoke to anyone who didn't have that as one of their favorites. Fourthly, I really liked Razzle Dazzle, which is the mostly vegetarian restaurant, although, to be honest, I did have many of their non-vegetarian options there, but it's a really funky kind of venue, and I really like that. Fifthly, and what was a surprise to me, is I really loved the galley, both from an area to eat, but also in the food options. Now, the galley is their reinvented buffet. It's more like a food hall, I guess, you know, that sort of concept that's become trendy, particularly in the big metropolitan cities at the moment. Now, the concept is there's stations and small, almost concessions offering things like Mexican, noodle, sushis, burgers, paninis, and so on. It's close, I guess, to a traditional cruise ship buffet, but it's done slightly differently. Now, I really liked it, and I don't think I've ever said I loved a buffet on any other ship. There were a couple of other restaurants, of course, like the Test Kitchen, which had a 6-course tasting menu concept, and Gumbai Korean barbecue. Now, these were both very popular, but they are much more experiential kind of dining venues. So I felt they were best visited if you're traveling as a couple or perhaps with friends. Now, as a solo traveler, I actually preferred the others. I found those actually just better for me. So overall, the dining on Virgin is a bit like going specialty dining every single night on a cruise, but it's included in your fare. So you basically don't have to worry about any of the on costs. Now, it worked for me as I hardly ever use the main dining room on most cruises, and so I really like this concept a lot. Now, for some people I spoke to, they were actually less keen on it. The reason, which I hadn't really thought about, but became obvious when they mentioned it, is for people who like simple, plain food. They don't want lots of kind of exotic food, if you like. Now, they told me they miss the main dining room because there they can more easily and more consistently find more of the basics and the classics rather than Italian, Mexican, and so on. And then having to every night navigate a very different concept and a different venue's menu. So that kind of made sense for people who like that approach to dining. Now, some people, of course, also said they prefer having a set dining time, and another bunch of people said, you know, they really like having their own table and the same serving staff every evening. So again, if those things are important to you, again, something to consider if you're thinking of Virgin Voyages. Now, definitely, the biggest surprise of everything on Virgin Voyages for me was the quality of the food. I hadn't even thought about it nor expected that that would be one of the things the line would do well. I guess so much got caught up in the things they were doing a little bit that was different, a little bit wacky, a little bit unusual or quirky. And so I hadn't thought about them getting perhaps one of the basics of cruising, really good food, as one of the things that they would do really well. So that was a really big surprise. This leads me to my next surprise. Again, it's kind of a core activity that hadn't crossed my mind because all the lines I've been on have pretty much the same approach. And I guess I kind of expected that to be the same on Virgin Voyages too. Everyone I spoke to spontaneously mentioned this one, by the way, and that is around the crew. What was interesting to me on Virgin Voyages, which I thought was visibly different, is the crew appears to be quite distinct and different to that on other cruise lines. They recruited what appears to be a younger, trendier and more diverse crew, and definitely seem to allow more individualism and personality to be shown. So for example, you'll see visible tattoos, even perhaps a couple of piercings that would definitely have to be hidden on other lines, on some of the crews. Not that all of them are like that, just there was definitely that was allowed so much more. There's lots of Eastern Europeans, there's lots of continental Europeans, South Americans, British, South Africans, Americans, and of course there's still representation from Asia, particularly the Philippines, Indonesia, and so on, where a lot of crew come from. But it was definitely a younger, hippier, trendier crew. It was also impossible to tell rank because everybody wears the same casual uniform, even the senior officers. So that was a kind of a different approach. There's no kind of sense of hierarchy. The service, in my view, was really good. I thought it was actually quite remarkable. I found crew were prepared to go out of their way and right across the ship remembered my likes, remembered my preferences, even in venues like the galley, the kind of the non-buffet buffet. The barmaid in the manor, I only went to occasionally, but she remembered I don't drink alcohol. She would produce a fruit punch even before I ordered it. There was a guy called Ravi on the help desk that sorted out an issue when I boarded with my app. He would then come up to me around the ship whenever I saw him. He'd check that all was working okay. He'd give me tips on things to do. So that kind of service was just kind of unexpected for me. I felt it was closer to what I've actually had on kind of smaller ultra luxury ships than you normally see on premium large ships that Virgin Voyages kind of really operates within. Now, I hadn't really expected service to be of that level. And as I said, it wasn't just me. Everybody I spoke to, both people I didn't know and just started chatting to and people that I knew from the channel, this was the one thing that I think everybody commented on as well. So that was kind of interesting. It wasn't just me. The next area that surprised me was one that I should have expected, but once I was on board, I realized I hadn't appreciated the degree that Virgin Voyages have committed to this whole area. And that was in the area of fitness and wellness. Now, if you are big into fitness and wellness, then Virgin Voyages will cater for you massively. Many areas around the ship are taken up with fitness and wellness, and a big chunk of the daily program is taken up with that too. On an average day, for example, there were between 10 and 13 fitness classes, yoga, spin classes, high impact training, and so on. They even ran kind of retro workout classes out on deck and in the manor, which I think were called VHS or something like that. There were then between 4 and 6 seminars around wellness and fitness every day, and that could be anything from posture, nutrition, massage, to skin and hair. Of course, then they had a lot of facilities. The obvious thing, of course, is the spa. But then on deck 15, there were 2 huge fitness rooms known as the B complex. One is burn and bike, which is the cardio area, and the other is build and balance, which is the strength training side. Up on deck 16, there's the training club, which is where they would run things like the circuit class, high impact training. A big wow factor was the 250-meter running track, which is elevated right up above deck 16. Part of the athletic club that I mentioned earlier has a whole outdoor workout area along the deck. I just hadn't really appreciated how much Virgin Voyages have committed to the whole fitness and wellness thing. The downside is people who are not into fitness and wellness did tell me they felt there was less organized activities and things for them to do across the day, especially on sea days. There were various non-fitness and wellness activities, but I think there probably were fewer than on other lines, certainly anyway, on my cruise. So there were for example, a number of gaming sessions and quizzes held, often in the evening in the social club, which also had games table and a small arcade available. There was also a foodie-based quiz held in the roundabout area on most days. Outside, there was quite a fun seahorse racing event held in the athletic club. There was adult painting classes and adult painting of a mural. But I think it is fair to say there was less organized non-fitness and wellness activities than on many other lines, certainly on my cruise anyway. So that is something to consider if that's important to you, and why not check in with kind of recent daily programs to see how that's evolved. So that was something I hadn't expected. There was one thing that I had expected that didn't happen at all to the degree that I thought it would. One of my really big concerns coming on board was that this was going to be a party ship, and it was just going to be party, 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 party everywhere. And people were going to be, going crazy all around the ship. But what I realized, having been on board, is if you want to party, you can party. But like with fitness, if it's not your thing, then it will not take over your cruise. I did notice that venues are open much later than on many other ships, and every night, usually after 10 or 11, there was some sort of party, often out on the pool deck area or in the manor. Themed ones like, say, a pajama party or a retro party or something like that. But in the earlier evenings, there would be live music in the bars, there would be cabaret, and there would be shows in the theatre. There was some great cabaret I went to, including kind of a cocktail cabaret evenings, one with Abby, the hostess, which I guess is the closest that it comes to a cruise director. And there was another cabaret with circus acts. They also had a sex and relationship therapist, Dr. Alex Schiller, who did a cabaret show, Never Sleep Alone, which definitely was a bit close to the bone out there and definitely not for everyone. In the Red Room, they had the shows. These were unlike other lines' review production show kind of shows, and they included things like the amazing Romeo and Juliet inspired dual reality with kind of acrobats. I was not surprised by the different approach to shows because Virgin Voyages have made much of this. So certainly if you want to party, you can, but actually it was very specific venues, and it wasn't that the whole ship was just one big party ship. Except possibly on Scarlet Night, it becomes a little bit more party-like, where what they have is a series of themed events and various pop-up events around the ship. I did expect Virgin Voyages to be full-on go-for-it partying, and that wasn't the case. So that was a good surprise for me, as I'm definitely not a party animal, and headed off to bed as the parties were starting late in the evening. As a note, if you are not a party animal like me, I would choose a cabin that is not underneath the pool area, as I do wonder if kind of the music and sound would travel. Now, I don't know that for certain, and I certainly couldn't hear it in my cabin. And I was on the same deck as the pool parties, but in the forward, I couldn't really hear the parties, but something to consider again. The other thing that did not surprise me, but did some, was the mix of people on board. I will cover that in another episode in much more detail. But as you would have seen through this, fellow passengers were quite diverse, and of course all over 18, because this is an adult-only line. But this is not just a young person line as many think, or certainly thought it is. On my cruise, I would say the average age was likely 45 to 60, that was the bulk of people, which also makes sense as this is a premium line, and these make up the bulk of the kids-free or kids-left home groups that are able to come cruising on an adult-only line. And of course, we'll see over time how that evolves. So now the big question is, will I come back on Virgin Voyages? Will I cough up my own money to come and cruise on one of their ships? Whether that's Scarlet Lady, Valiant Lady, Resilient Lady, or any of the other ships that are coming along. And the answer to that is as follows. When I'm going on a warm climate cruise, the Caribbean, the Mediterranean, I will definitely come on Virgin Voyages again. I think this is a ship, this is a line that's very much designed for warm climates. I like the different interpretation of cruising. As you know, I had heard, I really like the food, I like the service, I like the focus on fitness, I like the approach to entertainment, and for me it's a line that I now absolutely have on my list for warm climate cruising. However, it's definitely not for everyone. The people I spoke to probably split into two camps. People who basically craved and wanted to go back to a more classic cruise experience and classic cruise layout. I like that too, and I will still of course, keep doing those lines. But for some people who really like that, this was not for them. But then there were those people who relished this different interpretation of cruising. They liked the layout, they liked it being kind of familiar, but a lot of things having changed. Now, if you want to know more about Virgin and other things that I discovered and found out about, click and watch this video now, and I'll see you over there where I talk about in more detail the things that really concern me and how they address them.